This program is made possible in part by the Maryland Arts Council through the State of Maryland and the National Endowment for the Arts and the Howard County Arts Council through a grant from Howard County government.
My name is Michael Dirda. I'm a weekly book columnist for the Washington Post, and it's my pleasure to be speaking today with Jeannette Seaver. This is part of the HoCoPoLitSo, the Writing Life program, and we'll be talking for the next half hour about banned book weeks and the freedom to read. Jeannette, it's great for you to be here. Thank you for coming.
I'm very delighted indeed to be here, and I hope I will do my husband honor.
Well, tell us about your husband. Your husband is Richard Seaver, who was one of the great editors of the 20th century, long involved with the Grove Press.
Yes. You want a little brief?
Maybe a little history. The younger people may not know about the importance of the Grove Press.
Well, first, Dick went to France as a young student. He was 20, with a Fulbright, a GI Bill, and a third grant. I forget what it was, American Field Service, I think, with the idea of discovering literature, France, and write a thesis on James Joyce, who had lived in France a great many important years. And he joined very soon after arriving in Paris a literary magazine in English published by several authors and poets called Merlin. And actually I have just a passage where Dick is recruited, or he's meeting someone of the Merlin group who is very eager to publish French writers, because up to then they had been publishing English, Irish, and American authors in Paris. So Dick is brought to these people, and if I may, I just will read it.
This is his memoir, The Tender Hour of Twilight.
Here it is. Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Yes. So he's being introduced as he's asked to speak about French authors. And Alex Trokey, who was the director of that literary magazine, was a Scotsman, turns to Dick and says, "You mentioned you know some French writers we might want to publish." Alex said, turning to me. "One in particular," I said, fixing Trokey's inquiring gaze. "Extraordinary, like nothing I've ever read. And then there's another one, a playwright. Anyway, the curious thing is, neither is French." "I'm afraid you lost me." Says Alex. "I was asking about French writers." "Well, one is Irish, the other is Romanian, but both write in French," I explained, "and both live in Paris." "Who's the Irishman?" "His name is Samuel Beckett. I came upon him several months ago, and I've read everything he's written, or at least everything available. Some of his works are out of print." "Wasn't he somehow involved with Joyce?" Trokey asked. "Right. In fact, I've seen more than one reference to him as Joyce's secretary," I said. "Apparently he wasn't, but he was part of the whole coterie around Joyce, Irish, English, French, God knows who, in the late 20s. Well, what about Beckett?" "He wrote the lead piece in the critical volume on Joyce." "What has he written?" Trokey wanted to know. 3 novels, at least 1 play, and a couple of short stories, all in French. There's also apparently a slim volume of poems, an earlier volume of stories called more pricks than kicks, both in English. All I know about those last two, their title. I've read the 3 French novels and both stories incredible. And last year I heard a portion of his play, En attendant Godot, Waiting for Godot, done at the French radio by a wonderful actor-director, Roger Blanc. I've never heard of him, says Trokey. Very important, I've heard. Totally committed to the theater, especially the avant-garde. And the portions of Godot they performed were extraordinary.
Dick was at the premiere of Waiting for Godot.
Dick was brought to the radio taping of, when it had not been produced yet, on the Radio France. And I remember his telling me that he went and everyone else went to the taping thinking, we're going to meet the man. And of course, he didn't show. Then he went to see the play, which was then being played at the very small left bank theater called the Théâtre Babylone. And the play had opened with very mixed reviews, I would say mostly negative.
Mm-hmm.
And when Dick went, he went many times because he was by now a complete fanatic, Beckett fanatic. He said there were never more than 14 people.
Wow.
And when
Amazing.
he courted me, when we went out together, he took me to one of the performances. And you have to understand, I was a school kid, and theater was very new to me, his form, and I loved it. And later on, Dick told me it had been some kind of a vague test. If I failed the test, he would never see me
I
again.
never understood why people didn't laugh at Waiting for Godot and just have a wonderful time. It's so funny.
It is
I mean,
funny.
there's lots of philosophical depth to it,
But
but it's an hilarious play.
It is hilarious. You're absolutely right. Beckett loved the American comics, the silent movies, Harold Lloyd, and on and on. And in fact, many, many years later, as you know, he picked Buster Keaton to be the protagonist, the actor of his film called Film. That's 4 decades later, or 3 decades.
Well, you mentioned when you started that there was a Romanian, and I know this must be Eugene Ionesco.
Eugene Ionesco, that's right.
I suppose it was the bald soprano. Was
That was
probably the
no,
first play.
no. It was Les Chaises.
The chairs. Yes.
The chairs.
But this allowed Dick, as a young man, to become involved in the world of publishing.
Oh, completely.
And Merlin brought out Beckett's works in English, and this gave him these skills.
In fact, Trokey said to Dick, if you're so enthusiastic about this Irish person, why don't you write an essay? And I remember Dick saying, that's a tall order, but I shall try. And it's in the book. It's wonderful. And it is that very essay, bizarrely, that fell into the hands in America, although the Lord knows the distribution was rather hiccupy.
Mm-hmm.
It arrived in America, and Barney Rosset, who had just started Grove a few months before, fell upon this piece and literally took his bride, went to Paris. We had a lunch. We were newly married. And I remember his saying, tell me about this Mr. Beckett. Tell me, do you think I could meet him? I would like to publish whatever he has. From what you say, it's a Shakespeare of our time. And I remember Dick being very protective of Beckett, who was living quite in a seclusion and wasn't a social fellow at all.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to give Sam's address, but he gave Landon, the publisher.
Right, the French publisher.
The French publisher. And at that point, very soon thereafter, my husband Dick was drafted into the U.S. Navy. He owed them 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so we left. And by the time Dick came out of the Navy and went to Grove, Barney had already signed up all of Beckett's work. So.
Now, at Grove, Dick Seaver became a crucial editor, and particularly a great champion, along with Rosset, of books by controversial authors and very controversial
Yes, it was quite
books.
interesting.
This was basically in the 1960s. Can you tell us some of the books that
Yes, I
Grove was
can.
involved with?
Well, when Dick accepted to go to Grove, they'd already signed up and decided to publish, or republish as it were, Lady Chatterley's Lover, which had been banned for a great many years. But what really Barney wanted to do more than Lady Chatterley is to publish Miller, Henry Miller.
The Tropic book,
Yeah.
Tropic of Cancer. And
He was, because he apparently had done his thesis on Henry Miller himself at the Chicago University of Chicago, and it was his fixation. And he was a daredevil, Barney was, and a very brave fellow, and Dick was very much for the underdog and for the suppressed and for the... So those two were a very interesting dynamic duo, improbable, but very close.
So it was because Dick was is interested in essentially avant-garde literature.
That's correct, yes.
And even when he's back in Paris, he and the Merlin Group did have some connection with Maurice Girodias and the Olympia Press, which brought out a number of controversial books itself, as well as pornography.
Correct.
And
Well,
so he had a
Girodias
background in stuff that was going to cause trouble.
Absolutely, absolutely true. I mean, Girodias was a very suave, erudite, charming man, the son himself of a very prestigious publisher, but he was, how shall we say, was taking advantage of writers, and because the Merlin Group were all starving poets, they were glad to get $4 for a translation or $4 for if they could make up a pornographic novel. He had the Olympia Press, which was catering mostly to American soldiers.
Sure, yeah.
And they had to be turned out like biscuits all the time. And the entire Merlin Group went under alias names and wrote those novels. Dick didn't, I would say.
Did Grove and Barney Rosset model itself after the Olympia Press?
No.
Because the Olympia Press also did publish
Literary,
Nabokov, and
yes.
They had a mixture, as did Grove.
Absolutely. I think Barney was inspired by the courage and the daredevil quality of Maurice. And Maurice was very charming, and so it's true that in some way it must have pushed Barney a little bit along. So
he had started Grove Press, and he wanted to publish Miller, and he became the American publisher for Lady Chatterley's Lover,
Correct.
which had recently gone to trial in England and been
Correct.
exonerated. You
if
could
I may
publish
be
it.
permitted.
And so this was his first big breakthrough novel.
They had just started, and they were not making any waves, either with the reviewers or the box office, as it were. So Dick had just joined Grove, and our second child was just born, so he in the hospital. My next several days were spent toing and froing between Grove Press and St. Vincent's Hospital. My mind split between Lady Chatterley and Lady Jeannette, for one of the former front things were heating up. Everyone at Grove was focused on the book, knowing that it could move us into the bigger time, give Grove a new, higher profile. But there's also the distinct possibility it could bring the still fragile company down. The novel had been living underground for almost 3 decades, tolerated only in its native English in a country or two, but judged obscene in most. In the United States, both the Customs Service and the Post Office Department had banned it. The former from our ports, the latter from the mails. But Grove had carefully assessed the risks and decided the Chatterley War was worth waging. Curiously, although Barney relished the censorship battle and the notoriety that was bound to ensue, he did not really like the book. He found it weighty and often boring. He did not really want to go. In fact, despite its reputation, he had never read it, and he was until he was at Grove. In fact, the book he really loved, however, and was intent on publishing, come hell or high water, was Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. So I will skip here. The only crack in Barney's wall of stoic calm came when he announced, not long before the novel's scheduled release, that Ephraim London, who was a very prestigious Washington patrician attorney, on whom he had relied to handle the Chatterley case or cases, had been fired. Barney had some strong ideas on how the case should be handled, but Ephraim, whom Barney described as imperious, he thought he was Abraham Lincoln. He wasn't. Had said that it was his way or no way, period. Replaced by whom? Both Fred Jordan, another editor at Grove, and I asked aloud. A man named Charles Rambar, Barney said. I had never heard of him. How had Barney chosen him? Did he have experience, as Ephraim had, fighting censorship? Was he really well-regarded First Amendment lawyer? Barney shrugged and admitted that he had been out in East Hampton for the weekend when the decision to fire London had been taken. He knew two lawyers out there, one reasonably well, the other from having played tennis with him a number of times. He called the first, and there was no answer. He called the second, his tennis friend, Charles Rambar, who had the great good fortune to be home.
This made Rambar's reputation.
It certainly did.
And he became, known as a defender of First Amendment rights.
Exactly.
Now, I'm interested, and I think others might be, in exactly what happens. Does Grove Press decide to publish a book like Our Lady of the Flowers, or Lady Chatterley's Lover, or Naked Lunch, or The Story of O, books that they know are going to be challenged as being
it's a little more
obscene?
complicated.
Then what happened? Do they wait till someone sues them? Do they wait?
No. In the case of Jeannette, Dick really brought Jeannette to Barney, saying, along with many others, that this was a very important writer. Yes, he had a past. Yes, he was
a criminal, a pimp, and all.
And an overt, articulate homosexual.
Right, yes.
All of that in those days was a no-no, as you know. But I think the literary value is what really put. They understood that they were sailing a ship that might have a lot of waves, create a lot of waves. But that was secondary. Same with Burroughs. Dick had known Burroughs in Europe when he was in France, and really convinced Barney to publish Burroughs, knowing full well again that it might create what it did, in fact. Story of O was more Barney's idea because it had some kind of underground reputation, but it was very, very poorly translated. And it was retranslated in America and published by Grove.
And as we know now, Dick was the translator.
Yes, Dick was the translator, yeah.
Now, but these are all books that one could easily defend as if you are a First Amendment lawyer, that they are great works of art that are addressing controversial or challenging subject matter and doing so in a challenging way. But Grove Press also published Victorian pornography.
Well, that was Barney's obsession. Yes,
really,
he
did. It was just, there were things that would be harder to defend on literary grounds.
Barney was he was obsessive, and that Dick had nothing to do with that. And in fact, it was after Dick left that he carried on with the Victorian list.
Well, the other aspect of Grove, I think when Dick was there, was the magazine, Evergreen Review, which was also always in sort of the center of a lot of attention by legal authorities and the government.
Yes, because they published politically controversial. They published Che Guevara. They published Frantz Fanon, which they
The Wretched of the Earth.
Yes.
An autobiography of Malcolm X.
Well, that was at
that came out of Grove too.
They were really on the front line of a lot of important lines, as it were, and so was Dick, politically, actively. And and the Malcolm X was a godsend. The biography had, as you know, been in contract at Doubleday.
Mm-hmm.
When Malcolm X was gunned down, Doubleday was, and it seemed that there was a lot more than met the eye, so to speak. There had not been, there still hasn't really been a proper investigation, but Doubleday was concerned for the safety of its employees and immediately broke the contract.
Ah.
The day after, the same day, in fact, the news came to Dick and to the Grove group. They said, and Barney said, "This is a chance in a lifetime. We've got to pick it up." And they did. And that was a very important publication.
Was that their bestseller?
Oh, no. They'd had one or two before. Unpredictable. They had Games People Play.
Oh, right, that Eric Byrne.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they'd also brought over people like Beckett, and they had a
But
line
Beckett
of
was not a
plays.
bestseller.
Yeah.
Beckett was...
But I mean, a bestseller for them, a steady seller. But
steady seller, no, I beg to differ with you.
Huh?
The beginning of Godot publications, say,
Uh-huh.
I think they sold 3,000 copies at that time, back in the, 60s. And when I think back, Beckett had asked my husband, who had already translated several short stories with Beckett, to would he kindly undertake the translation of Godot. And at that point in Paris, Dick, the deadline, he had to give in his Joyce next month, and he was working night and day. He had been distracted, and he had to do it. And he said, "No, I can't. I'm so sorry. I have to. Joyce has a precedent. I have to do Joyce." And I think back, life would have been a little bit cozier had we...
Well, did the fact that Grove was constantly in the news for these shocking books, did this affect your private life, your family life, your children? I mean, was it difficult at all for you?
No, personally not. It just made Dick more stressed. No, it didn't.
Eventually...
Except when I remember seeing the principal of my children's school, I had a meeting with him, and Mrs. Seaver, it's nice to see you. Remind me, what does your husband do? And I said, he said, "Oh, really?" And that sort of put me on the blacklist right away.
Now, eventually, Dick and you went on to form your own company.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
And did you carry over any writers
Yes,
from
we did.
Grove?
Yes, we did. Yes, Octavio Paz, Burroughs. We did one Beckett early novel, but everything was sewed up with Grove. Contractually, we couldn't. Yes. In fact, when Dick started, when he left Grove after 12 years and started the Seaver book line at the Viking Press, a great many of the authors just came right on along with Dick.
Well, it must have been exhilarating to be involved with all of these.
It was
these sort of
exciting.
books.
They were extraordinary people. I mean, people like
And you got to
Sioran.
meet them all?
Oh,
or-
very good friend. I don't know if you're familiar with Sioran's work.
Oh, I am. I've written about it.
Yes.
And
Well, he was a very important thinker and a very close friend. And all these people, Ionesco, Burroughs, yes, we became very good friends with every one of them.
do you think about how important Grove was for the kind of freedoms we have today in America to read? Particularly when you look out at the world now where there's so much controversy, particularly from the Islamic countries over videos or books like the Satanic Verses, and know that you and your husband and were part of a movement that helped forestall this in America.
Very much so. I mean, I really think what is taken for granted today by this generation, even the one before, is really owed to Dick and Barney, who really fought blood and soul in every court in every state in America. It took about years to finally a bill was passed and freedom to publish.
Well, we still have lots of books that are at least challenged by various school boards, but
I'm
in
sure.
America, I mean, I think the general feeling is that we we are really open and able to write and
My
read
goodness.
anything we like, and that this is one of the great benefits of living in this country.
Yes, indeed, I agree.
particularly in the world as it is today.
Right.
And although sometimes it does seem that the areas where censorship is focused have changed. In the old days, it was essentially sexual matters and obscenity.
You're right.
Whereas now it tends to be religious or
Yes. Very much so.
nationalistic aspects
Yes.
of culture.
I mean, so
And-
many incredible writers are behind bars in various Islamic countries, including China.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's, I know we're all grateful to Grove and Dick Seaver and Barney Rosset and you for your
Thank
your
you.
championing of the cause of First Amendment rights. And this is all described beautifully in your book, the Tender Hour, actually Dick's book that you edited from his manuscripts after he died, The Tender Hour of Twilight, which is subtitled Paris in the 50s, New York in the 1960s, Publishing's Golden Age.
Right.
And I really think it was a golden age.
It was.
Just saying the names of some of the writers.
I know.
that you-
And you know, Grove was very original and unique still today in one particular respect as a publisher, is that as you sat around the editorial table, if Dick said, I've read Frantz Fanon's book, this is a very important book, and I'll tell you why, and he gives an expose. Barney, to his absolute credit, would say, go for it. Today, you have to have a P&L. You have to sit around the table and say, okay, this is a kind of book that will sell potentially X number of copies there, and would cost so much for production. Therefore, we can only offer X, and it's all down. And very, very many, in many cases, editors leave the editorial table having been vetoed because a book of quality will not sell, and therefore.
Well, it was a golden age.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeannette.
Well, I loved being here. It was a great honor to meet you and to address this wonderful subject.
This is Michael Dirda. I've been talking with Jeannette Seaver for HoCoPoLitSo's The Writing Life. Thank you.